All right, good evening. Welcome to the 2022 Iowa City Book Festival presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the executive director of the organization, and I'd like to thank you for coming out and joining us this evening. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the sponsors who make the festival possible. The City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, our hosts here at the Iowa City Public Library, Prairie Lights Books, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, and Think Iowa City. So thanks to all of those folks, again, for making this possible. So we're about halfway through this year's festival, and I hope you'll be able to join us for some of the other events that we will have in the coming days. The print program that you hopefully picked up on your way in or that you can grab on your way out will list all of the different things that we have going on between now and the end of the festival on the 13th. We have many events tomorrow and Sunday back in this room, Meeting Room A at the library, as well as other things going on in other locations. If you're watching us on the stream, you can visit iowacity.bookfestival.org for the full schedule. This evening, we're delighted to present Curtis Bauer and María Sánchez. Curtis Bauer is a poet and translator. The Iowa native's third and most recent poetry collection is American Selfie. He's given readings, lectures, and taught workshops in Spanish and English across the U.S. and in Argentina, Ecuador, Mexico, Venezuela, and Spain. And most recently, he taught writing workshops in Spanish for the Lines and Spaces program, a literary partnership with the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State and the International Writing Program here at the university. He divides his time between Spain and Texas, and he's translated several works of Spanish poetry and prose, including the newly published memoir, Land of Women, by our other guest, María Sánchez. Sánchez is a third-generation Spanish veterinarian whose memoir looks at how we view women in rural life. Following in the footsteps of generations before her, she travels the countryside of Spain, bearing witness to a life eroding before her eyes. She is the first woman in her family to dedicate herself to what has traditionally been a male-dominated profession and rebuffs the bucolic narrative of rural life often written by and for consumption by people in cities, describing the multi-layered social complexity of people who are proud, resilient, and often misunderstood. Part memoir and part rural feminist manifesto, Land of Women acknowledges the sacrifices of Sanchez's female ancestors who enabled her to become the woman that she is. And so I'd like to ask Curtis Bauer to join me up here, and he and María Sánchez will have a little conversation and share some of the writing that is found in the book. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and it's great to see you, Maria. Again, right, this is how we know each other across Zoom. We haven't actually met face-to-face other than through a screen, right? But I'm going to say a few things. I guess it's a kind of introduction, reintroduction. But when this book came out in May, Maria sent a tweet out into the world that said something like, who would have thought the granddaughter of Carmen La Gordita would one day cross the ocean and be translated into English? And I immediately thought of my maternal grandfather, a farmer from Germany I grew up with. But then I checked myself and I thought, that doesn't make any sense. I should be thinking of my grandmothers. And the idea, what all of that's about is that I hardly knew them. There were women who were silenced, not by force, but because they weren't given the opportunity to speak or to be listened to. Nesta Roberts, born in Wales in 1908, and taken to the U.S. as a baby and who hardly ever left Iowa after that. What would she have thought of her grandson going back across the ocean to translate María Sánchez into English? So eventually her grandson, her granddaughter, and great-granddaughters might eventually then wonder about her life and stories. Or Irva Schwarting, born in rural Williamsburg, Iowa in 1919, first wife of Edward Schwarting, and then when he died, she married his brother, William Schwarting, my grandfather, the farmer. Irva, the farmer's wife, the baker, the canner, the cook, and the woman who taught me how to hold a fork and knife, to sit proper in public. What was her childhood like? Why didn't I ask her? to talk about her childhood. These are some of the questions that kind of came up, as I was thinking about Maria's book. And this book is one that addresses silence and shadows and ignorance. And it's not just a call to action or a feminist manifesto, but also a manual for approaching, identifying, preserving, and valuing what's on the verge of being lost. We're going to talk about a few of those things tonight. We're going to read a section. Maria will read something in Spanish, and then I'll read my translation of that. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to participate in a conversation with us. If you've got a question, please call for the microphone so that Maria can hear the question, and also those people watching online. So Maria, I'll turn it over to you, and you can jump in.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy sharing this meeting with you. First, I want to say thanks to all of you for making it possible. So, as Carte said, I'm going to start reading a part of Land of Women in Spanish. Por un medio rural vivo. A veces siento que los habitantes del medio rural y los de las ciudades hablamos en un lenguaje diferente, que no nos entendemos. Nos oímos, reconocemos el rostro y los gestos, pero no nos escuchamos. Las palabras quedan suspensas en el aire, pero no llegan a germinar en ningún sustrato. Ambos formamos parte de un diálogo, pero no existe entendimiento. Como si el idioma agigantara la distancia entre el campo y la ciudad. Como si el encuentro cara a cara sucediera de cada lado solo frente a un espejo opaco que nunca devuelve la imagen. El escritor vasco Bernardo Atxaga comienza su libro Marca, en el que escribe sobre los muertos sin nombre y con paradero desconocido en la tragedia de Guernica, con una reflexión preciosa alrededor de unas inscripciones talladas en una roca que se encuentra en un museo de Milán. Il maso di Bormo no es una piedra cualquiera. Las marcas en la roca tienen 7000 años. No se entienden. No hay lugar a la lectura. No existe la idea de un idioma o de un mensaje. Solo son marcas. Incisiones en una piedra de alguien que quiso dejar su huella ahí. No sabemos por qué, con qué interés o si significaban algo. Pero lo que no se puede leer ni entender llega igualmente hasta nosotros. Podemos ver ese idioma desconocido, tocarlo, intentar descifrarlo. ¿Y si no importa qué dice? ¿Y si la marca tuviera otro fin más allá de causas o fines? Atxaga traduce. Las incisiones no se entienden, pero siguen latiendo. Porque transmiten un mensaje. Consiguen traernos miles de años después un mensaje claro y poco rebatible. Estuvimos aquí. Un día estuvimos vivos aquí. La marca es la piedra, como la brecha que señala pero a la vez espera. Me reconozco en este fragmento de Atxaga, un medio rural que intenta contar su historia, dar a conocer sus problemas. Un territorio lleno de personas que no quieren irse y que hacen lo posible por no tener que hacerlo. Que agitan los brazos pidiendo auxilio, que señalan la ausencia, que inciden en lo que tenemos que preservar. Pero la marca está hecha. Y los que están fuera empiezan ahora a reconocerla. Hablan sobre despoblación, falta de recursos y servicios, cambio climático, naturaleza, conservación, pero no terminan de encontrar la lengua exacta para no quedarse solo en los conceptos, para ir más allá de titulares que no terminan de contar y de enseñar el verdadero rostro de nuestro medio rural y sus habitantes. ¿Y si necesitamos un nuevo lenguaje para tender puentes entre el campo y la ciudad? ¿Y si entre todos tenemos que volver a aprender a nombrar? A pesar de mis raíces, de mi trabajo y de mi vínculo tan intenso con el medio rural, yo también me convierto muchas veces en esa forastera que llega a un lugar donde habla una lengua diferente que no entiende. Es especialmente doloroso cuando te das cuenta de que esto te sucede hasta con tu propia familia. En algún momento caí en que no entendía muchas de las palabras que usaba mi familia para hablar de su día a día o para comunicarse conmigo. Palabras que tantas veces había oído sin prestarle atención. No las conocía. No sabía qué significaban. No formaban parte de mi lengua. Este despertar se convirtió en una obsesión. Empecé a preguntar y cada palabra desconocida se convertía de pronto en una nueva para mí. Me volví otra vez niña. Aprovechaba cada momento para señalar y preguntar. Y no solo con mis padres, mis tíos y mis abuelos. También la mano que apunta y la voz que cuestiona llegaba a la gente de los pueblos a los que iba a trabajar y los ganaderos y ganaderas con los que paso prácticamente la mayor parte de mis días. Una parte de mí sigue sintiéndose culpable. Si yo, que me muevo entre el campo y la ciudad, empezaba a perder la lengua rural, el idioma de los míos, ¿hasta qué punto no ha desaparecido ya para los que viven en las ciudades? Hice la prueba. Empecé a recoger esas palabras como semillas y las metí en un cuaderno, resguardadas, apretadas contra mí, como se hace cuando se recogen las semillas y se colocan en un papel para secarlas. Y una vez preparadas, se guardan en botecitos de cristal en la despensa o en el cuartillo para la próxima siembra. Así fue como las palabras de mi familia comenzaron a viajar del pueblo a la ciudad y a conocer una nueva tierra a la que agarrarse. Cuando estaba entre amigos, en el trabajo o en algún encuentro literario, no podía evitar sacar el cuaderno y lanzar alguna palabra sin revelar el significado. La arrojaba como el agricultor lanza la semilla a la tierra, esperando que terminaran agarrando, alcanzaran a brotar y dieran su fruto. La mayoría de las palabras que traigo a la ciudad son desconocidas, pero despiertan algo que no se puede nombrar, que llevamos dentro y que sigue ahí, latente, esperando la luz adecuada para hacerse notar. Sacan del sueño un interés que consigue que el idioma de mi familia y de tantos siga vivo. Y rescatan algo más. Las palabras desconocidas despiertan preguntas a los suyos, nuevos nombres, antiguos recuerdos. Rescatan el vínculo y consiguen traer a la superficie un nuevo idioma sobre el que empezar a trabajar. Palabras como fardela, el saco o talea de los pastores, como galiana, un camino más pequeño de los trashumantes, como cabellano, ese terreno en la sierra que es llano, con lomas y valles pero suaves, como empollo, la primera hierba que nace en otoño tras las primeras lluvias, como jabardillo, ese conjunto de aves más pequeño que una bandada.
So this is from the 5th chapter in the book called For a Living Rural Community. Sometimes I feel as if rural people and city dwellers speak a different language, that we don't understand each other. We hear each other, we recognize each other's faces and gestures, but we don't listen to each other. Words remain suspended in the air, but they don't germinate in any substrate. We're both part of a dialogue, but we don't understand each other, as if language widened the distance between the countryside and the city, as if the face-to-face encounter occurred on each side only in front of an opaque mirror that never shows a reflection. The Basque writer Bernardo Achaga begins his book Marks, in which he writes about the unnamed and unaccounted-for dead in the Guernica tragedy, with a beautiful reflection about some inscriptions carved into a rock in a museum in Milan. Il Masso di Borno isn't just any stone. The marks on the rock are 7,000 years old. They're unintelligible. There's no way to read them. The idea of a language or a message doesn't exist. They're just marks, incisions in a stone by someone who wanted to leave a mark there. We don't know why, with what intent, or if they meant anything, but what can't be read or understood reaches us all the same. We can see that unknown language, touch it, try to decipher it. What if it doesn't matter what it says? What if the mark had another purpose beyond causes or intentions? Achaga translates, the incisions aren't understood, but they continue pulsing, because they transmit a message, Thousands of years later, they managed to bring us a clear and hardly disputable message. We were here. One day, we were alive. The mark on that stone, like the opening that indicates, but at the same time separates. I recognize myself in a Chagas fragment, a rural community that attempts to tell its story, to make its problems known, a territory full of people who don't want to leave and do everything possible so they don't have to. We wave our arms for help. They point out the absences. They're the ones who have an impact on what we have to preserve. But the mark has been made, and those on the outside are now beginning to acknowledge it. They talk about depopulation, lack of resources and services, climate change, nature, conservation. But they never seem to find the exact language to move beyond the concepts, to move beyond headlines that never fully express and show the true face of our rural environment and its inhabitants. What if we need a new language to build bridges between the rural and the urban? What if all we have to once again, what if we all have to once again learn how to name? Despite my roots, my work, and my intense bond with the rural environment, I too often become that stranger who arrives in a place where they speak a different language she doesn't understand. It's especially painful when you realize this happening to you even with your own family. At some point, it dawned on me that I didn't understand many of the words my family used to talk about their daily lives or to communicate with me, words I'd heard so many times without paying attention to them. I wasn't familiar with them. I didn't know what they meant. They weren't part of mi lingua, my tongue, my language. This awakening turned into an obsession. I started asking questions, and every unfamiliar word suddenly became new to me. I became a little girl again. I took advantage of every moment to point and ask. And not only with my parents, my aunts and uncles, and my grandparents. The pointing hand and the questioning voice also reached the people in the towns where I went to work and the herdswomen and men I spent almost all of my days with. Part of me still feels guilty. If I, someone who moves between the country and the city, was beginning to lose my rural tongue, the language of my people, to what extent had it not already disappeared for those who live in the cities? I tested it out. I began to collect those words like seeds, and I put them in a notebook, safeguarded them, held them close, as you do when you gather seeds and place them on paper to dry them, and once they're ready, save them in little glass jars in the pantry or in the storeroom for the next sowing. That's how the words of my family began to travel from our town to the city and to recognize a new soil to cling to. When I was with my friends, at work, or at some literary event, I couldn't help taking out my notebook and tossing out a word or two without revealing the meaning. I threw them out like a farmer sows seeds onto the soil, hoping they would take root, sprout, and bear fruit. Most of the words I carry to the city are unknown, but they awaken something that can't be named, that we carry inside and that is still there, latent, waiting for the right light to be detected. They rouse from sleep an interest that keeps the language of my family and so many others alive. And they rescue something else. Unfamiliar words awaken questions of their own, new names, old memories. They rescue the connection and manage to bring a new language to the surface to start cultivating. Words like fardela, the backpack or sack shepherds use. Like galiana, a trace or smaller path transhumants use. Like caballano, that terrain in the mountains which is flat with hills and valleys, but gentle ones. Like empollo, the first grass that grows in autumn after the first rains. Like jabardillo, that group of birds smaller than a flock. So, what we thought we would do is just start with a little bit of, maybe I'd ask her a question, but then maybe you all have some questions or something that you're thinking about. But the first thing that comes to mind for me is this idea of language that is lost, that maybe there are these words that maybe you grew up with that you never use. And I'd like Maria to talk a little bit about about those words and about language that you've discovered, you know, that's on the verge of extinction, let's say. And talk a little bit about what you're doing, like what some of your projects are and why you got into that.
So for me, it's very important this labor of rescuing words in danger, because I always think about every word who is in danger, who can disappear. At the end, it's like other word dying, because you know these words are fundamental for me. Every time one of these words like this dies, there is, or I was saying, a word dying. So for me, it's not about language accent, as you are listening to my special accent so of Spain, or the meaning, for example, of the word. It goes beyond that, because we are talking about a special way of living, inhabiting a territory, or relating to the others. Like I'm thinking animals, people, the land, the earth, the resources. Also, I was thinking when I speaking in the trees, in the mushroom. So when some of these words are saying, because I'm used to use sayings also in my poetry, in my writings. When some of these words disappears, I think that also kinship dies. So, you know, we are living in confused, difficult times, not easy era, because we are living with uncertainty. I'm thinking in a war, Ukrainian war, pandemics, climate change. So we are every day asking ourselves about the place we want to live in the future, also today, tomorrow. So maybe it's so important to know these words, this saying from the past, that are telling us a singular way of living or relating to the others, not only the people, as I was saying, also the land and the other beings. So it's so important to know that, to think about what kind of future we want to build, to imagine, or to live in, you know? So for me, when I think that maybe I started to pick, I was thinking to pick the words like you pick the fruits of the mushroom in the country. Maybe when I started to realize that my grandparents one day they will die. So people are not immortal, no. So this moment that you left the childhood, start to be an adult, you start to realize, understand a lot of things. Also, in my opinion, in my experience, I started to feel like a kind of fears, because maybe I'm arriving late to the lives and the stories of my family. So I think also that this hobby, this necessity of collecting and preserving the words, maybe comes from this feeling.
A big part of this book is about, you know, listening to stories and identifying, you know, a kind of connection between the land and the people who are living on the land. And, you know, there are, in particular in the second half of the book, focusing on three significant women for you. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, tell the audience a little bit about how you arrived at that kind of discovery? You know, say, for example, a narrative of one of these women, just to give a little bit of insight into it.
Yes, this part is very emotional because, as you say, the first part of Land of Women is more general. I try to speak about the situation in rural areas in Spain, and the second part, sorry, for me is more like a poem. It's like a song for my mother, my grandma, and my great-great-grandma, that's Pepa, because I needed to rescue them to the silence, to get them from the shadows and give them a light and give them a paper to tell their stories. So, you know, I think that before the book and the story of Pepa is very interesting to tell you that before the writing, it was a pain. It was a pain because I discovered that my family never told me stories about my parents because they thought that it was no important, that it was no important to share, to recognize. So it's hard because I have to become a writer and wrote my first book that is poetry, you know, it's Cuaderno de Campo. It's about my family, my roots, the feeling of being a woman in a country full of men working with the animals. And, you know, this is also a book where I give thanks to my family for all the things I learned from that, but also it's like me saying, okay, I'm here, I'm Maria, and I am a woman, so I can be another person and do the things well in my manner. So it took recognition and success to get to know my roots, the stories of the people of my family, in special women. For example, the story of Pepa, my great-grandmother. My father started to tell me the story after he realized that this poetry book, Cuaderno de Campo, was successful and was constantly being sold and written about. So with this moment, I always questioning myself, how many stories have I been late for? Do you understand? How many things do we not know about because they have not been given the first unnecessary recognition? So I was happy about knowing the story of my grandma, but at the same time, I was thinking, and the other women of my family or their stories. So maybe I'm thinking always about these stories that are lost. At the end, myself as a writer, I think that every day I'm trying to write about the stories I could never meet, I could never hear, listen to them, no? So it's like a paradox. I don't know it's the word, the exact word, paradoxal. It's paradoxical, no? That I'm trying to tell something that I never know it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anyone have a question you want to ask? I mean, I've got plenty more, but maybe anyone? Okay, all right. Well, one of the, in that particular chapter, you know, where you're talking about your great-great-grandmother, it comes about through walking, through being outside, right? And a lot of this book is you know, a situation of being on the land or being in a particular place, and then the story that comes from that. And you know, to just think of the generation, or I guess the creation or the recognition of these stories, you're asking lots of questions, right? And then those questions lead to some responses, and then more questions and more responses, and it just keeps going. Could you talk a little bit about where this project, the Land of Women, is now taking you? What else are you doing that's related to, I guess, this, or that's come out of this book?
I was thinking meanwhile you were talking about making also a question, because I just remember, you know, Annie Ernaux, the recent Nobel, the French writer that just this week won the Nobel. She has a book where she writes about the abortion, about her abortion, and she said something like she needs to write the things she never could find in the book. You know, this a sense of feeling that you are in the book, you are feeling identified, or you are asking for help or asking for something you don't know. So I was thinking about her when I was listening to you. And I don't know if I understand you well. You are asking me about what things I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I am.
What has resulted from the writing of this book? Right.
Wow. There is, for me, it was a fantastic surprise that I never expected that, because of this book, there is a lot of people writing me, meeting me in meets like that, talking about that maybe they before read the book they felt they were orphans. It's very linked to the quote from Annie Ernaux, no? Or having this space in the central narrative. So it was it made me so happy. People who told me, "Oh, I could write this book myself," or "You have told my entire life." You know? So it's very nice realizing that people needed this, not the book, this space to feel identified in the culture, in a book, in a film, in a song. Because unfortunately in Spain, people in the villages, in rural areas, they were used to be portrayed to a simple postcard, a flat postcard, full of bucolic thoughts, or with a lot of pain, anger, violence, you know, in a culture. So it's like there is another light to them with this book. It's like, oh, I could be this person writing this book. And also because of Land of Women in Spain, suddenly there were a lot of projects, similar projects to the book, interviewing farming women, telling their stories, a lot of feminist projects trying to rescue and to share the stories of people from rural areas. So there is a lot of things to tell, very good news. And also, you know, after of Land of Women, it came Almáciga, my books that is full of words in danger, because they don't appear in the dictionary. I have a lot of work because of this book. it was a very, very great surprise for me. The, how to say, the love of the readers with the book.
Yeah. In that book, Almáciga it's a collection a little bit like Rob McFarlane's Landmarks, Barry Lopez's, what is it, Home Ground, I think is the other book, where it's just a collection of language or of words that we're losing track of or that aren't so common anymore. And in addition to the book, you also have a web page, right, where people can sow those seeds of words that, you know, maybe they're discovering or offering, you know, as part of that seedbed. And I'm curious if, you know, in the audience, if you've got any, if you recognize or think about any of this, if you remember words that weren't, or maybe that you used in your youth or you heard and maybe are now, you know, you never hear them again.
Yeah, I don't actually have a word, although I'll think. But I wanted to say that when Maria was reading and she made that equivalence, the metaphor of words as seeds, you know, in Iowa, we talk a lot about saving seeds. And particularly, I mean, I would kind of add something to that metaphor and think of it more as the heirloom seeds from heirloom plants, which are ones that were original and now have been lost to hybridization and, you know, making tomatoes that have to be kind of squared off so that they fit in packing boxes and things of that nature. And yet the seeds that Maria is talking about, the words, are ones that are older than that go back to a time before we were commodifying words and putting them into boxes of, you know, kind of, I don't know, commercialized meaning rather than the meaning that they used to have. Yeah. But now I'm going to start thinking about some words.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in rural South Dakota, and even during my lifetime, I was on a farm with my grandparents. So I saw firsthand how they lived. And between the time that I was there, seeing my granddad and their neighbors do all the farm work with horses, and my grandmother cooking on a wood stove, and going to a rural schoolhouse and stuff, that it's really tied to the fact that rural America, and I assume rural Spain, any rural life has changed dramatically. So it's loss of an entire culture, really, and it's certainly bound up in words, but also in the way people lived and viewed the land. It was just a different relationship to how they took care of their land and their animals, and how they raised their children and families. It's remarkable. This has brought a lot of memories back for me, because I certainly know that there are a lot of words as well that people don't know, and it's simply because they don't do things the way they used to, particularly in rural life. So anyway, thank you.
Hi, I have a question. I was thinking about this because I'm from Costa Rica, and my grandmother certainly uses a lot of words because she was from a very small town that I don't recognize. And sometimes it still happens that she will say something and I have no idea what she's talking about. But I ask in the moment what she means by it, and then I forget, which is very unfortunate. So I was wondering if this collection of seeds, as you call it, do you see that as a kind of a sort of museum work or as an archive, or would you like it to be something more alive that can kind of preserve these words in a way that they become part of our current language again, in a way, somehow? Yeah. Thank you.
Totally. For me, it's not about doing a collation or taking all these seats or like words and closing in a museum or a library. It's more about that. It's about speaking, carrying with yourself the words. And it's not only the words, you know, behind each word we are losing, or this not, or this word is not in the culture or in the dictionary, on the narrative. Behind this word we have lives, we have stories, we have unique and different works and links with the land. So now that we are in climate change, I think that it's very important to know this word and their different stories behind the words. And it's not only the word, it's the language, the accent, the land, in special that people use this word. For example, in Spain, there is for me it's very beautiful. I feel like it's very emotional. We have in each territory of the country, we have different words for the same labor. And it's the labor in the villages and rural areas that is used to name the work in common with the people of the villages. But it's not a work that is forced to do. It's a work that people from the villages want to do because it's for the life, for the animal, for the healthy. So it's very nice these different words to call in Spain we say el trabajo común, los bienes comunales. I don't know, Curtis, if you have this word in particular in English.
What is it, shared work or
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
right.
not about
Collective
you have to
work.
do the work. It's the
Collective.
work who is born because, the people of the villages, the neighbor talk and say, okay, we are going to build a new road. We are going to share the land to the animals cool graze, or to clean the roads, the path to the river, or having a vegetable patch in common. So at the end, these things we are talking about now when we are trying to imagine new futures, new cities to live in, new kinship between nature and people. So I think we could discover a lot of things in this world, but I'm not trying to live like my grandma or my great grandma used to live, because now we have a lot of things that are much better. So to me, the innovation could be missing, no? This knowledge that unfortunately, for example, in Spain, the academy never wanted. It was always seen from a paternalistic view and classist view, taking this knowledge and giving it the recognition, the necessary, the fair recognition. I'm missing with the knowledge, the technology and all the facilities we have today.
Yeah, I was thinking of when I think there's another question over here.
Here
Okay, but something I was thinking of when I was a kid, in eastern Iowa, there maybe a tornado would pass through in the spring, in another part of the area in the region, and a group of people would go to help clean up the destruction from the tornado, and you wouldn't go to get paid. You'd go to help out in the community, and you'd get paid with food, right? I mean, it was some kind of a, that labor communal help, or, a barn raising where people get together and do this to share the labor because you can't afford to pay someone, but you're all doing it and it benefits the whole group, right?
Hi, thank you. Of course, when you think of a question a few minutes before, and then the conversation goes on, and your question gets more and more complicated as you wait your turn. So I'm going to try and reprise it, but I have a sort of two-part question for the two of you. One is the metaphor of fruit picking as a research approach, that these words and these experiences and these stories were a kind of fruit that you were able to pick. And I understand you could go crazy with that metaphor, and then there are seeds in the fruit and stuff. But what I'm interested in is, did anything resist being harvested? Did anything resist being taken into your research or taken into your book? Was there a story or a set of experiences that was really actually very hard for you to take from the place where it was based? The stories that we're hearing tonight, they've made so many journeys. They've journeyed from the country to you, from the past to you, from you to Curtis, to, and into the English language realm. So there's all of this progress and transit that's occurred, but I guess I'm sort of also interested in what wasn't able to move, what isn't able to be dislodged or taken away. And the flip side of that is sort of for Curtis, I'm really interested about the phrases, not just the nouns that you discovered, not just the names for things, but the phrases that may be captured. You were just talking about communal work. And if there was another phrase that really talked about a kind of kinship, maybe with nature or with a kind of feeling that maybe you discovered, and whether it was a particular challenge, if there was one that was a particular challenge for Curtis to translate into English, because that feeling would have to make a couple different jumps.
You go first.
I have a lot of ideas. I'm sorry if I couldn't understand you very well. But I think it was very interesting, your reflection, because it makes me think about before I'm writing, not this book in general, because I can't remove my link with the nature. I'm always in nature. I'm always looking to the trees, to the birds. So I love go to the forest and pick mushroom, asparagus. It's like the nature is always in my life. I'm not apart from the nature and and the environment. So when I was listening to you, I was thinking, oh my God, maybe my writing is always trying to translate the language of the nature that I never understand, I'm always trying to understand the language of the trees, of the birds, of the lichen, of the soil. So at the end, I'm thinking about the poetry, the narrative, at the end, the literature as a constantly translation of a lot of things, a lot of emotion. In my case, in my experience, it's always linked to the nature. So I don't want to think about taking something and removing from the land is born or their own place. Not this because it could be anthropocentric, I don't know if it's correct to say in English, or colonial's way of being in the world. I prefer to see that like sharing the experience or the emotion. It's like maybe I'm trying with my writing to say the people who are reading to me, okay, look at this. Look, the next time you are going to the nature, look that tree, look at that animal, try to hear the birds, or also with your own family, because we spend a lot of time with our family, with our grandma, grandpas, or mom, but really, how many times are we listening to them? Are we interested in them? And maybe when we are teens, when we are teenagers, we don't listen to them really. So it's like, I don't know how to say this word in English, but I use it a lot in Almáciga, in the book with the word seeds. Curtis, pellizco, like when you are telling somebody, hey, look at that, or with a word, with a feeling that
Like nudging
makes
them.
that this person realize, oh my God, I never told that to my grandma, or I never know the name of that bird I'm listening now through the window.
Almost like pinching them or saying, why didn't I do this or that? Thinking about that the first part of your question, the fruit, picking as a research approach. I mean, I think that, we're constantly always looking for metaphors, right? It's constant. And as she's saying, imposing or trying to I don't know. I mean, I think what if I understand Maria correctly, she's moving against the harvest, but more of the recognition. And it's not that I'm going to take, but I'm going to see, I'm going to observe, right? So maybe instead of the fruit picking, the fruit, watching the whole process of it. One of the things that I've thought a lot about with, what isn't maybe able to move is I was pretty happy that there weren't a lot of those examples of those words, because you start to think, well, what are those words in English, right? I'm giving a sentence description, but maybe there is a word. And then I started thinking, I should try and translate Almáciga. And then I thought, no, that would just be, I mean, it should be a project, right? It should be, I think, something that would be healthy for me, but also for language for a community, right? And which leads me to this challenge, this idea of community. And we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, our own, and today even, what do we give up? What do we decide we're going to leave aside or cover up so that we can move forward into something else? And, it could be a way of speaking. It could be a recognition of, the fact that I'm from Iowa, but I'm a writer living in New York City, and I'm not going to talk about being from Iowa. That kind of thing that afterwards you think, that was so stupid. Why does that matter, right? But I think the challenge for me in this book is recognizing what I'd given up and whether I was able to get it back. What language had I forgotten? And possibly because I don't know the stories of my grandmothers, of a lot of people in my community, how can I get that back? I've lost resources, right? So that's a huge challenge and concern. And this book, every time I kind of pick it up and we have this conversation, I think about that, right? And it makes me reconsider, how I engage with someone in a conversation, what I'm listening, what I'm listening to, what I'm asking, how involved I need to be in a conversation, right?
Great, thank you. I think we've got one last question here.
I grew up in Iowa, and all of the females in my family seem to confide in me for some reason. And I'm wondering if you could characterize the women's stories that you heard from your relatives. Mine were often tragic. They didn't want to speak about the tragic part of their life, and so that's why they stayed quiet. I wonder if you found the same thing.
¿Qué tipo de historias eran? ¿Cómo los has entendido? Sí.
Sometimes I lost the Wi-Fi, so I lost some words, so I couldn't understand the whole question.
So the question was, how would you characterize the stories? What type of stories were you told by the women in your family? And he gave the example of most of the ones that he heard were tragic, right? Or the ones that weren't told were tragic, right?
It's a very interesting question because, in Spain we have a dictatorship. And my mother, for example, the story of my mother, for me, is very sad. And always I have a meeting like that, or a lot of time I'm writing, I'm thinking about my mother. Because maybe if my mother could keep going to school, maybe the writer today here with you could be my mother. Because the story of my mother is the story at the end of a lot of women in my country. In the 60s, in the 70s, in Spain, a lot of kids, of women, like my mother, had to leave the school to start working in the country. For example, my mother, when she was 12 years old, she had to start working with my grandpa, taking olives from the trees, with no machines, with her own hands, And she had to get up very early in the morning, and with the donkey and my grandpa, they have to go walking to the mountain and come back when the sun disappears. So she used to spend all the day in the country working, and she never could decide about her life. And about that, you also have the dictatorship in Spain, and the silence, and the fear of having another war, and the machismo, and also the education. My mother was educated to be the perfect housewife. She's expert cleaning, cooking. She's a very good mother, but she never had the opportunity, the choice to study. So it's not only about my mother, it's about that generation of women that couldn't decide. So this is one of the questions I asked myself in the book. Where are those women who could write about rural areas in Spain? Because obviously they couldn't write because they had to work in the land. And it's very interesting because if you, for example, take the story of the lives of some male writers in Spain who used to write about country and nature and confront their lives and stories with the life and story of women from the land, they are completely different because, they have power, they have money, they have the voice, the loud speaker. So, for example, I'm always giving the same example, no? Comparing, I did it in Land of Women. I compared the life of Miguel Delibes. It was a very famous writer in Spain. I love all their books about nature and rural culture in Spain. But I like to compare the life of this writer and my mother. And what idea of the country and the nature is different for them. For him, going to the land, to the nature, is it's like, you know, having a work, because he spent a lot of time speaking with people from rural areas about animals, about the land, about the language. But in the other hand, the nature and the country for my mother is renunciation, is having no opportunities, is feeling cool because you are working in December here in my village is very cool in winter. So it's very interesting to compare the life and the situation in Spain in that years, in that time, if you were a man or a man or a woman, you know. So I think that we have in Spain a lot of families with a lot of stories, but also with a lot of silence, because we have to break the silence to start to tell the stories.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Maria. And,
Well, that brings us to the end of our time. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much to Maria for joining us. I know it is either very late or very early, depending on how you look at things in Spain right now, so thank you. Thank you to Curtis for joining us. I love that we could use technology to bridge this geographic gap and talk about the way you two are using translation to bridge the language gap. So it was wonderful. We've stretched our friends at Prairie Lights very thin, so I had originally thought that they would be here to sell books tonight, but they do have books at the store. They're going to be around and about all weekend for us, so we had to make some sacrifices, but they will be there. I know they have copies and they would love to sell those to you. I also wanted to make sure to mention the MFA in Literary Translation program at the university. They have been our partners on this and have been wonderful partners for us for years. And so I would like to thank Aaron and his wonderful program for helping to make this possible as well. So thank you again. Thank you to Maria and Curtis. Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
bueno, María, hablamos más tarde, ¿vale? Ciao.
Ciao, thank you so much.
All right. Good night.